Howdy guys and girls, hopefully everyone's doing alright. I know I am. Wet, miserable day as always. Ooh. Let's make sure that we get past this guy. But yeah, no better time than to obviously test the eMTB. So stick around as I give you guys my 2-month review of the Hybridizer Sann. Stay tuned.
Oh, bloody hell. Okay.
Okay, so there's a lot for me to cover in relation to this eMTB frame set, but rest assured, I'll do my utmost to leave no stone unturned. But essentially, you're looking at a high pivot, single pivot linkage driven eMTB frame set, which has 164mm of rear wheel travel. Now, I have taken this opportunity to test this frame set with the Bafang M560, a motor which is capable of achieving either 130 or 140 Nm of torque, depending on the configuration. I'll be making an independent video in relation to my experiences with this motor. Capable of supporting either a 160, 170 or 180mm travel fork up front, and can be ran as either a full 29er mullet setup or full 27.5 front and rear. In addition, I've also taken the liberties of using the 860 Wh battery. Oddly enough, this battery is not only the lightest of its class that I've ever seen as to the voltage and the capacity, but oddly enough, it is the lightest battery as to what Hybridizer use in relation to this particular frame set, weighing only 3.6 kilos. And I guess we do need to take a second in order to acknowledge the geo adjustment which is built into this frame. So you do have the ability in order to run this bike in either the high, medium or low position, courtesy of a flip chip located at the base of the shock driver. However, you do also have the provisions of running this with either the 27.5 rear dropouts or the 29er. Currently, I have the bike set up as a full 29er with 170mm travel fork up front. However, fear not, I will be making direct comparisons as to how this bike handles in relation to its 29er configuration compared to its mullet setup as well.
Now, it is worth mentioning that throughout the entirety of me riding this bike, I have implemented a 5mm reach adjusting headset cup. Now, for those of you familiar with my content, you'll recognize that I've used Superstar components before in the past, and this being no exception. Usually what I've done is I've used their angle headsets. However, on this occasion, I've opted to use their 5mm reach adjusting headset cup, which has ultimately pushed it out. So I've got 5mm more effective reach, as well as increased the stack height by an additional 10mm. So essentially in the slackest configuration, as opposed to it being 476 reach, this is effectively a 481. Obviously in the mid it would be 485, and then in the high it would be roughly around 489, coupled with the fact that I'm obviously running a 50mm stem on this bike. And again, I am a bit tall should I say, for this frame, being as it's a large, but this has been the way in which I've been able to get this bike to effectively fit me as comfortable as possible.
Now, one thing I did notice throughout my testing of this eMTB was that I did need to change the sag in relation to when I changed it from either the 27.5 rear dropouts to the 29er. Hybridizer does suggest running the bike with up to 30 to 35% sag. However, throughout my experience, I did find that I did need to change. Therefore, in the 29er setup, I preferred to run the bike with 30% sag, whereas in the 27.5 rear dropouts, I preferred to run the bike with 35% sag. Now, there'll be plenty of time for me to talk about the look and the aesthetics of the bike as the video unfolds. But for now, let's just swing a leg over the bike and see what the bike's all about.
Alright, so as I traverse this steep ass climb, let me give you some telltale information as to this eMTB. So yes, this is the Hybridizer Sann alloy frame, 164mm of rear wheel travel. Can be paired with either a 160, 170 or a 180mm fork. I've gone with a 170. Hybridizer make a good manual explaining all the different configurations as to what you can put this bike in, so I'll leave a link in the description for you to go check that out. It's implementing a high pivot suspension platform, single pivot, or rather single pivot linkage driven, but this is a first for me. Like I've never tried a high pivot before, and it's been quite interesting. Oh, that's nice. Level 4. Okay. This is a large frame. I am 6'3", so I am above the recommendation as to what Hybridizer give in relation to rider height in conjunction with frames. Sadly, they don't make an XL, and we'll talk about that in relation to my negatives, but that is one thing I will gladly say they should really think about, making an XL. Oh, back to level 2, why not? Don't really need it to be giving me that kind of power. And speaking of power, 864 watt-hour battery, 48 volt, which is pretty good. This is probably one of the best 48 volt 800 plus watt-hour batteries I've messed around with. Charging time on this is ridiculous, regardless if you have the 3 amp charger or the 6 amp charger. But again, we'll talk about that more as we delve into the system of this eMTB. And speaking of system, yes, top tube display is pretty nice, with a remote which can be ran further outboard on 820mm wide bars. It's been a while, Deepwood. Rumour has it that you're not the same as to what you used to be, but we'll find out, won't we? We'll find out.
Yeah, this didn't go to plan, I'll be completely honest with you. The tyres in which I had on the bike were not suited for this track, especially on this wet, loose, muddy ride. But hey ho, we live and learn. But as you'll soon see, I've made the most of it, so yeah.
Oh, bloody hell. Okay, let's try that shizzy again, shall we?
Yeah, not my finest hour at Deepwood, but as the old saying goes, any experience is better than none. And to be honest with you, I did take a lot away from me from that day. I mean, yeah, I needed the right tyres for that track. But more importantly, I was able to gauge the bike's performance in terms of its handling, as well as the ability in order to gauge the rear wheel. I mean, it's at this point I just transitioned to using the full 29er setup from the mullet. And I'll be honest with you, that 29er rear wheel definitely came in handy on that day. Especially once the track started to get wider, which enabled me in order to carry a lot more speed and momentum.
Ooh.
And the bike's rearward axle pack definitely allowed the bike to maintain traction in some of the jankiest of terrain and circumstances.
Oh, oh, rear wheel saved me there.
It didn't take long before I became acclimated to this bike in terms of being able to push the high-end speed it warranted. The geometry, the weight, as well as the configurations one can put this bike in, definitely lends itself to being more downhill biased. But to be honest with you, the stability, that was next level.
The rear wheel will have a tendency of moving. If there is one thing which this bike does very well at, it's keeping the speed. I mean, obviously, we've got this bike set up as a full 29er, so naturally it's going to have a mechanical advantage. But just as I was doing that downhill section, throughout no part did I think that I needed to twitch the pedals in order for me to engage the motor, in order for me to get the speed going. Like, the bike just naturally just wanted to keep the speed and momentum going. You could argue that, coupled with the fact that, you know, this bike, it's 25 kilos, so I'll gladly say, like, you know, it ain't a lightweight. But to be honest with you, like, this bike, it just kept on giving me the message of truck on, just truck on, just truck on, keep on trucking on. And the bike literally got me down. There were sections and where I thought to myself, like, the rear wheel was just going to, like, just kind of catch me out, but literally, like, it just kept the momentum going and kept the speed going. I felt composed, I felt balanced, I felt, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna say it, I felt confident. I felt confident.
And that's not something to be taken lightly, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, after all, the more confident you feel on the bike, the more likely you're going to use it in a wide range of circumstances. Speaking of circumstances, I can imagine that most of you are asking the question whether or not I've had any problems in relation to the idler pulley. Now, truth be told, I've only had the bike for 2 months, but considering that there have been quite a few muddy rides in which I've been on, being honest, I've not had any problems with that idler pulley. Yes, I have had to be more vigilant in relation to drivetrain maintenance, but let's be honest, it's an e-bike. When wouldn't you have to be more vigilant in relation to drivetrain maintenance? So in short, provided that you follow Hybridizer's instructions in their manual, as well as have good indexing skills in relation to drivetrain setup, I suspect that you should be fine. Well, unless you have a motor which can peak out at 140 Newton meters of torque and over 1000 watts.
Okay, so I've only got 18% battery left, but I'll show you exactly what I mean. So this climb, which I'm about to do, shouldn't be well, here you go. It should be familiar to people who've seen my content on this video, on this channel. So it's almost like before you start the climb, you got to be in the gear before you start commencing the climb. Knew that was gonna happen. Yep. And that's it. That's exactly what I was afraid was gonna happen. Snap the chain. Fair enough. Okay, all right. Obviously there's no damage or anything, but still. All right. Well, the good news is that I usually bring some quick links with me anyway, as well as some tools and such. But yeah, as you can imagine, we've just done that climb again. This climb, it's no stranger to the channel. I've used this in order to gauge some of the motors which are featured for the channel. But even so, like obviously, like it's in the lowest cog now, so it's not too well, let me put the clutch back on. It's not too taut, but there's enough, because obviously as it expands it will then taut or get tension. The frame itself, in terms of its quality, I can't really fault. Like, you know, it's an alloy frame, and you know, as much as you hear some people, you know, criticizing some brands which use carbon, you know, I'll be that guy to say, when it comes to alloy, you can't really go wrong. Like, you know, this feels just as burly and just as capable as, say, like my Nuke-proof Megawatt. It's almost like the platform, it's designed more so that it wasn't taken into consideration, the motor. But I don't know, like, it's weird. Like, I know that there's some eMTBs which use the Bafang motors which don't really take the positioning of the motor into consideration concerning the suspension and such, but on this occasion it kind of looks like the suspension platform, it was more optimized without first really thinking about the Bafang motor in terms of its placement. More so, the positioning of the motor was only thought of because they wanted to just get the idler pulley in the best position possible. But I don't know, it's just one of those things where I just feel that Hybridizer, they could have gone the extra mile in terms of trying to factor that in conjunction with gearing, because this setup isn't exactly ideal for me, and that's even factoring in the fact that this is a large, and you know, I wouldn't mind an XL, but okay.
Alright, so as I said at the beginning of the video, this is my 2-month review of the Hybridizer Sann and should not be considered to be my long-term review. I wouldn't mind obviously experimenting with this frame set a little bit more in terms of what components can work better for this bike in order to improve the enjoyment of this eMTB for me. But at the same time, being as I've gone with a fairly comprehensive build, you know, Zeb fork, Super Deluxe out back, and ran it with both 27.5 as well as a 29 rear end, I've been able to kind of gauge as to what I do like and what I don't like in relation to this eMTB. I'm not going to go too much into that at this point because, again, I wouldn't mind experimenting with a couple of bits and pieces. But at this stage, I will gladly say that there are a couple of negatives I wouldn't mind calling out just for Hybridizer's attention. My negatives in relation to this eMTB would be the fact that, one, there's only 3 frame sizes. I would love it if Hybridizer were to make more frame sizes, especially if you were to look in the jumping reach from the small to the medium and the medium to the large, which is 20 millimeters. Obviously, if we were to look at a hypothetical XL, we could easily enough think that this would have a reach of 500 mil. And I'd even go as far as say that if they were to go even further and make a double XL, it would have a reach of 520. In that circumstance, I'd probably be torn. In fact, I could probably see myself going for the double XL and finding creative ways in terms of shortening it down for me. But again, Hybridizer would be awesome if you did make more frame sizes. Second negative, I'm not a fan as to how much seat post is exposed at the seat tube. Now, for reference, I'm running a 180mm one-up dropper seat post, or rather a one-up 180 V2 one-up dropper seat post. So I do appreciate that there might be other dropper seat posts with have an equivalent drop which may have a lower insertion requirement and stack. But even so, how much post is exposed at the seat tube? It is aesthetically not pleasing. And I'll even go as far as to say that there's eMTBs which I've built up for the last 2 to 3 years where I'm able to run longer droppers completely slammed in the frame. Now, I do get it. Obviously, because of the suspension layout, there's obviously going to be compromises. And one could argue that even if they were to introduce an XL and a double XL, I don't think that that would eliminate the problem in terms of seat post insertion requirements for longer droppers. But even so, Hybridizer, it'd be awesome if you could find a way in order to combat that issue, just so that aesthetically and functionally, it would be more pleasing to a lot of riders. But as for the versatility and the capability of this eMTB frameset, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, I'll say it. It's impressive. I know I say that a lot, but I mean it with this bike. This one is quite impressive. And I'd even go as far as to say that considering that this is Hybridizer's first eMTB, they ticked a lot of boxes. Like literally, they have ticked a lot of boxes. And I'd even go as far as to say that for those who are interested in building up an eMTB frameset, this should be one you should keep an eye on. Hybridizer, if you find this video, well done. Well done. And I'll be that guy to say I will be keeping an eye on you guys as time goes on. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. Keep a watchful eye because obviously we'll be featuring the Hybridizer Sann in other content because I wouldn't mind, again, playing around with this bike in different configurations with components. If you've enjoyed this video, do us a favor, smash that like button, spread it with like-minded individuals, link in the description to all the places as to what I've used in order to get this bike set up in. And until then, take it easy, stay safe, peace with the journey, #FABT, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.